Hillary Clinton looks back in anger. What happened? Hillary Rodham Clinton, who, as she puts it, won more votes for president than any white man in American history, is not the first candidate to capture the popular vote but lose the election. She is the fifth. The founders, for varying reasons, distrusted popular democracy. Southerners were wary of a challenge to slavery, others feared the emergence of a national demagogue. The Electoral College, Alexander Hamilton wrote in Federalist Paper No. 68, would block the rise of a leader with talents for low intrigue, and the little arts of popularity. An extra layer of electoral deliberation, he thought, would also insulate the American system from a hostile hack from abroad, the desire in foreign powers to gain an improper ascendant in our councils. Andrew Jackson was the first to suffer this constitutionally enabled result of losing while winning, when he conceded the 1824 race to John Quincy Adams. Jackson, whose portrait now hangs in the Oval Office, charged that he had been undone by a rigged ballot. In 1888, Grover Cleveland lost in much the same manner to Benjamin Harrison, but then avenged his humbling 4 years later. Samuel Tilden fell to Rutherford B. Hayes, in 1876, and yet, after the Baroque, months-long struggle inside the Electoral College, Tilden seemed almost relieved. Now, he said, I can retire to private life with the consciousness that I shall receive from posterity the credit of having been elected to the highest position in the gift of the people, without any of the cares and responsibilities of the office. In the ballot of 2000, Albert Gore, Jr., Bill Clinton's vice president for 8 years, won 500,000 more votes than the governor of Texas, W. Bush. After losing the final battle before the Supreme Court, Gore soon departed Washington to brood in Nashville. He grew a beard. He grew fat. He seemed, at first, quite lost. When I visited him there, a few years later, he said he would eventually get around to confronting that bitter experience, just not yet. He never fully did so, certainly not at book length. Instead, with time, he shaved his beard, traveled the world giving lectures and making a documentary about climate change, and, in 2007, shared the Nobel Peace Prize with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He made a fortune as an Apple director, a Google advisor, and a venture capital partner. He found his way, and whenever someone brought up the election of 2000 he always remembered to lighten matters, saying, you win some, you lose some, and then there's that little-known third category. For all of Hillary Clinton's skills of survival, she will have a hard time finding a similar piece or place in public affairs. For one thing, Gore was in his early 50s when he lost. Clinton is 69. For another, the circumstances surrounding her defeat are immensely more disturbing. Clinton lost a race that few thought possible to lose. Her opponent was not Mitt Romney or John McCain or Marco Rubio but Donald J. Trump, a demonstrably crooked businessman and reality television star, an unsavory, if shrewd, demagogue whose rhetoric and policy proposals had long flouted the constitutional norms of the United States. She lost because of the tactical blunders of her campaign. She lost because she could never find a language, a thematic focus, or a campaigning persona that could convince enough struggling working Americans that she, and not a cartoonish plutocrat, was their champion. She lost because of the forces of racism, misogyny, and nativism that Trump expertly aroused. And she lost because of external forces, Vladimir Putin, Julian Assange, James Comey, that were beyond her control and are not yet fully understood. There are times when all I want to do is scream into a pillow, Clinton admits in a raw memoir, both apologetic and apoplectic, called What Happened. Clinton describes the daily activity of working on the book with her collaborators, 2 former speechwriters and a researcher, as cathartic. They spent long sessions at her house talking through the details of the campaign, exchanging notes, suggestions, edits. But, as Clinton said when we met recently for a long conversation, the process of thinking about it all, Trump looming over her like a predator at the second debate, the incessant drumbeat of emails, awaking from a nap on election night and being told that Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and the election itself had all slipped away, was like willfully reenacting a hideous accident. Literally, at times when I was writing it, I had to go lie down, she said. I just couldn't bear to relive it. But, Against the advice of some of those closest to her, she has relived it, for publication. Clinton's memoir radiates with fury at the forces and the figures ranged against her, but it is also salted with self-searching, grief, bitterness, and fitful attempts to channel and contain that fury. At one point, she writes, "Breathe out, scream later." On the night of November 8, Clinton expected to give a victory speech at the Javits Center, in Manhattan, as the first female president-elect. The stagecraft was in place. She would wear white, the color of the suffragettes, the fulfillment of Seneca Falls, and stand on a platform cut into the shape of the United States, under a vast glass ceiling. It was to be a triumph on a historic scale, an American breakthrough as consequential as Barack Obama's election night speech in 2008, at Grant Park. Instead, the next morning, she wore purple, a symbol of the unity of red and blue states, and, before hundreds of shocked, weeping staffers, she made her way through a hastily drafted message of endurance and gratitude. Afterward, she and Bill Clinton climbed into their car and, as they were driven along the Hudson River, she was hollowed out, unable to speak, struggling to breathe. At every step I felt that I had let everyone down. Because I had. When Clinton arrived home, she changed into yoga pants and a fleece and wandered outside. She lives on a cul-de-sac called Old House Lane, in Tippecanoe, a wooded hamlet in Westchester County. The property is surrounded by a high white fence. Secret Service officers operate out of a red barn in the backyard. It was cold, rainy, quiet, and, she writes, the question blaring in my head was, how did this happen? Before I went to see Clinton, I spoke with some of her top advisors in the campaign. Some still work with her, others stay in close touch, commiserating, exchanging links to stories about Trump-related outrages or malfeasances. They share a sense of colossal failure, of having failed Clinton, and, more, of having failed the country. They know that she, too, carries a sense of both victimhood and guilt. There is an exponential quality to the pain she feels. One of them told me, "It's the pain of losing an election that you thought you were going to win, and it's taken to the nth power. It's squared by the fact that this is the second time she has fallen short, and cubed by the fact that the person who won is so deeply unworthy, in her view, and represents a mortal threat to American greatness. There is in her a depth of anguish about the outcome that there is no parallel for in modern memory." In the first months after Trump's victory, Clinton kept mainly out of the public eye. She didn't want to hear the theories about why her campaign had given America a Trump presidency. She could not handle easily the gestures of sympathy. She listened with a tight, patient smile as people recommended Xanax and gave her the names of their marvelous therapists. Friends always hastened to praise Clinton for her determination to keep going, but they uniformly described her now as angry, confused, bitter, and sad. How did she get from day to day? Chardonnay helped, she told me. It's become a stock line for her book tour. She also practiced a form of yoga that involves alternate nostril breathing. That someone might leap on her prescription of white wine and yoga as a parody of blue state self-care is, in her post-candidate life, irrelevant. Clinton spent a lot of time around the house. She read Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan novels of friendship, becoming, and abandonment. She returned to the work of Irene Wen, a Dutch-born priest and theologian who wrote about his struggles with depression, spirituality, and loneliness. She consumed mystery novels, Louise Penny, Donna Leon, Charles Todd. She went to her granddaughter's dance recital. She watched old episodes of The Good Wife and Madam Secretary, even if that seemed a little on the nose. She teared up watching Kate McKinnon on Saturday Night Live singing Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. I did my best, it wasn't much. She went through scores of articles about Russian meddling, offshore content farms, Trump family misadventures. At times, she writes, I felt like CIA agent Carrie Mathison on the TV show Homeland, desperately trying to get her arms around a sinister conspiracy and appearing more than a little frantic in the process. She also spent time thinking about what she might do in the future, so that the rest of my life wouldn't be spent like Miss Havisham from Charles Dickens's Great Expectations, rattling around my house obsessing over what might have been. She has yet to settle on anything concrete, save for the conviction that she will never run for office again. In her concession speech, Clinton had, like Gore before her, gestured to the need for national unity. She mouthed the requisite words of conciliation. Donald Trump is going to be our president. We owe him an open mind and the chance to lead. Our constitutional democracy enshrines the peaceful transfer of power. But as I sat down with her in a bare conference room in her office on West 45th Street, a room so drained of decoration that it seemed like a stage set for a production of Endgame, she made it plain that, after 8 months of Trump's presidency, she was through with political politesse. Although her press person had told me that Clinton did not want to be photographed, she writes a long passage in the book about the trials of daily sessions with hairdressers and makeup artists, and all that is required of women in public office to achieve the gloss expected of them. She entered the room looking much as she had throughout the campaign. Still, there was a heaviness to her manner, a kind of grim determination to get a message across. One last time. I think the president and his administration pose a clear and present danger to our democracy, she said. I hoped, back on the day after that election, that I wouldn't be sitting here, all these months later, feeling compelled to say that with a sense of urgency. But I am, and I do. Trump, Clinton went on, is immature, with poor impulse control, unqualified for the position that he holds, reactive, not proactive, not strategic, either at home or on the world stage. And I think he is unpredictable, which, at the end of the description one can give of him, makes him dangerous. The latest incident with North Korea, going after our ally, South Korea, while North Korea is threatening the region, threatening us, going after China, which we need, whether we like it or not, to help us try to resolve the aggressive behavior of Kim Jong-un. It puts a smile on Kim's face. Just like him going after NATO and the Atlantic Alliance puts a smile on Putin's face. He admires authoritarians. In fact, before this crisis with North Korea, he was praising Kim Jong-un. He clearly has a bromance toward Putin, whom he lauds as a great leader. He's being played by the Putins and the Kim Jong-uns of the world. I'm not even sure he's aware of that, because he has such a limited understanding of the world. Everything is in relation to how it makes him feel, and therefore he has little objective distance, which a leader must have. Making decisions in the Oval Office requires a level of dispassionate, reasoned analysis. We've seen no evidence he's capable of that. Diplomacy in the Trump administration, Clinton said, has become the work of generals, particularly James Mattis, who is both Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State. As far as I can tell, she didn't speak critically of Rex Tillerson, but the former Secretary of State said, "There are no diplomats at home. There are no China experts. I don't know who is left in the government at any level of experience and seniority who could be brought into the kind of diplomatic effort that I would advocate for. You should have an envoy that carries the imprimatur of the president in Korea right now, shuttling between Tokyo and Seoul and Beijing, and trying to figure out what is the best way forward here." In all, with Putin behaving like a Bond villain, the country on alert against a nuclear North Korea, and the Oval Office occupied by a reality TV personality, Clinton seemed to feel that a line had been crossed. The country had fallen into a perilous state of unreality. "It's like a bad movie," she said. "You can't believe anybody would ever greenlight it, and all of a sudden it happens." What happened was a #1 bestseller on Amazon well before its publication, on September 12. This is not surprising. Of the more than 65 million people who voted for Clinton, and who now feel miserable about the Trump presidency, not a few want to hear from her again, and gain some consolation from her story, if only to speculate about a through-the-looking-glass world in which she is in the White House, Merrick Garland is on the Supreme Court, and Trump is ranting about illegals in a studio at Fox News. Clinton's previous books, It Takes a Village, Dear Socks, Dear Buddy, Living History, Hard Choices were more brand burnishment than human expression. They were performances of virtue or anecdotal enumerations of her travels and accomplishments before an upcoming campaign, everything rendered incautious, sometimes disingenuous, market-tested prose. Such books belong to a well-established tradition. Living History, published during her first term in the U.S. Senate, is an evasive, soft-focus memoir. It attempts, for example, to portray her father, a frustrated, angry, and often frightening man, as an ultimately lovable curmudgeon. Hard Choices, Her chronicle of her years at the State Department possesses all the flavor and the nutritional value of a breakfast bowl of packing peanuts and warm water. What happened, though hardly an Augustinian confession, is much closer to the bone than anything Clinton has ever published. She knows that the voice of the vanquished isn't always welcome, but she remains defiant. There were plenty of people hoping that I, too, would just disappear, she acknowledges. But here I am. The wounds that the new book opens are not just Clinton's. A few nights before meeting with her, I was at dinner with a political professional who worked on her 2008 campaign. I mentioned that I was going to interview Clinton, and sought his advice about what I should ask. He put down his fork and scowled. Ask her why she blew the biggest slam dunk in the history of fucking American politics, he said. A few diners at adjacent tables looked up. Oh, and ask her if she is going to donate the millions of dollars she's gonna make on this book to charity. Ask her, why should you profit from this disaster? There was more of this. On the day I was to see Clinton, I read an article in Politico headline Democrats dread Hillary's book tour. Unnamed alums from her Brooklyn campaign headquarters told the reporters that the promotion of what happened was the final torture. Others joked about how many stops she'd make in Wisconsin in her campaign to sell books. A top Democratic donor said that Clinton should just zip it, but she's not going to. Senator Claire McCaskill, a Democrat from Missouri, was asked about the book. She replied, "Beg your pardon?" and walked away. Her colleague from Oregon, Ron Wyden, said, "I've always been a looking forward kind of guy. I think I'll leave it at that." Before publication day, a passage from the book leaked in which Clinton criticizes Bernie Sanders for giving Trump an opening by slashing away at her integrity during the primary campaign. When he was asked about the book by Stephen Colbert, on The Late Show, Sanders, who wrote of his own experiences in the 2016 race in a book he published last November, did not miss his cue. "Look, Secretary Clinton ran against the most unpopular candidate in the history of this country and she lost. She's upset about that and I understand that," he said. "But our job now is not to go backwards, it is to go forwards." I think it's a little bit silly to keep talking about 2016. The bitterness of that primary race will not soon fade. Sanders saw Clinton as a clueless, corrupt, temporizing, buck-raking member of the neoliberal elite. She saw him as unserious about the details of policy, reckless, self-righteous, swept up in his own sense of ideological purity, and not a Democrat. Even some of the people closest to Clinton are wary of the book and the inevitable blowback it will invite. If she carried a cross and were bleeding on the street, that would not be enough apology for some people, one advisor told me. According to a recent NBC News poll, Clinton's favorability rating is now at 30%, the nadir of her public life. This is not a country that countenances losers, it seems, no matter what the popular vote. No matter how badly the rules have been broken, no matter how pernicious the victor. To type Hillary Clinton and watch Twitter light up in an efflorescence of insult and wild accusation is an alarming experience. She has been a target of unholy abuse from the start. In 1980, her husband lost the Arkansas governorship after his first term in part because, many voters said, she had the temerity to go by Hillary Rodham. She soon added Clinton. Once the Clintons were in the White House, everyone from Rush Limbaugh to Pat Robertson, from Christopher Hitchens to the editorial writers of the Wall Street Journal, accused her of heinous crimes, drug running, financial fraud, shadowy doings around the death of Vince Foster. Trump was able to revive many of those old tropes and, through his speeches and tweets and the amplifying force of his incessantly televised rallies, once more cast Clinton as Lady Macbeth. When I told Clinton that I had looked her up that morning on Twitter, she smiled knowingly and said, "A dangerous thing to do." She knew all too well what was there, and it wasn't merely the usual filth about her appearance or her marriage. It was the kind of material that allowed men like Trump, Michael Flynn, and Chris Christie to get in front of roaring crowds and inspire chants of "lock her up." "I thought a lot about this," Clinton told me, "and for whatever combination of reasons, some I think I understand, and others I don't, I am viewed as a threat to powerful forces on both the right and the left." I am still one of the favorite subjects for Fox TV. With the return of Steve Bannon to Breitbart, we'll see him utilizing that publication. "It's because I do speak out, and I do stand up," Sometimes, what I say is not fully appreciated for years, to be honest. At least, it seems to me that way. But I'm going to continue to speak out. And on the left, there is a real manipulation of the left. In addition to those who are calling me names, we know that Russia has really targeted, through their trolls and bots, a lot of accounts, a lot of Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, of people on the left, feeding them a steady diet of nonsense. Such talk was not a matter of wishful conspiracy thinking. Scott Shane, of The Times, recently published an article in which he, with the help of the cybersecurity firm FireEye, detailed the Russian efforts against Clinton in the campaign, far beyond the hack of the Democratic National Committee and John Podesta's email accounts. Shane reported that a cyber army of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of bloggers and bots with fake American identities spread disinformation about Clinton on various platforms, including Facebook and Twitter. These tactics, Clinton told me, were right out of the playbook of Putin and one of the generals whom he listens to, who talked about the kind of war planning and preparation that Russia needed to be engaged in. It was no longer just large, conventional forces and nuclear warheads, it was also cyber war, covert and semi-covert, even overt, as we saw in Ukraine. This attack on our electoral system was at least publicly encouraged by Trump and his campaign. I hope the investigation in the Congress and by Robert Mueller, as well, will give us more information and understanding of what else they really did to us. It's not going away. I asked Clinton if she thought Trump or his campaign colluded with the Russians. I don't want to overstate what we already know publicly, but I think the compilation of coincidence adds up to something more than public support, she said, referring to Trump's refusal to criticize Putin. Why should I tell Putin what to do? And his encouragement of Julian Assange. I love WikiLeaks. I asked Clinton if she thought Trump or his campaign colluded with the Russians. I don't want to overstate what we already know publicly, but I think the compilation of coincidence adds up to something more than public support, she said, referring to Trump's refusal to criticize Putin. Why should I tell Putin what to do? And his encouragement of Julian Assange. I love WikiLeaks. She went on, the latest disclosure by Facebook about the targeting of attack ads, negative stories, dovetails with my concern that there had to be some information provided to the Russians by someone as to how best to weaponize the information that they stole, first from the Democratic Committee, then from John Podesta. And the refusal of the Trump administration officials, both current and former, to admit to their involvements with Russians raises a lot of unanswered questions. Putin's motives, she said, went well beyond destabilizing a particular